session, which is more about the theoretical aspects of radicalization. And we have another amazing panel joining that. Professor Adil, Rasheed, Marian, Duris from Europe, and Professor Ayman Salama from Egypt. Okay, and Lauren from Israel will be moderating that session. So Lauren, over to you from here.
Good morning, Shalom from Israel. Thank you so much.
Shalom. You can start after 3, 4, 5 minutes, whenever you want to.
Yeah, it's okay. Everyone is ready?
Yes, you can start.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, good morning. Welcome to our panel. I wish you all the best, and I'm looking forward for your lectures. So, we will start now with Dr. Adil Rasheed. He's a research fellow and coordinator of the Counterterrorism Center at the Manuel Pacquiao Institute for Strategic Studies and Analysis. The author of the book, Countering the Radical Narrative and ISIS, The Race to Armageddon, is writing a new book on the cross-counters of political Islam in West Asia and South Asia. His research papers mainly countering the threat of radicalization, terrorist programs and challenges, as well as jihadist radicalization in India. Internal challenges, external threats, are widely read in Indian strategic community. A student of Islamic theology and history, he writes extensively for Indian and international media organizations, participates at various national and international seminars, and gives orientation lectures for officers and personnel of various Indian security agencies. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Okay, loud and clear. Thank you. I would like to make a PPT presentation, so I'd like to share it with all of you. Can you see it right now?
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll get on with it. Thank you, Chair. At the outset, I would like to sincerely thank the Usanis Foundation, particularly Mr. Abhinav Pandya, to have given me this truly wonderful opportunity today. Well, to put it simply, radicalization refers to the mental process that transforms a law-abiding citizen into a terrorist or someone who supports terrorism. When we talk of terrorism and radicalization, we must understand that terrorism is just the occasional physical manifestation of the violent extremism of the mind. And that if we want terrorism to stop playing out in the phenomenal 3D reality, we will have to first defeat extremism in the ideological noumenal domain. There was a time when strategic experts thought that terrorism is merely a tactic, a kind of subconventional warfare employed to achieve certain political ends. I think we have come quite far from such a facile supposition. Today, terrorism, particularly in the form of jihadism, has transformed from merely a mode of warfare to an ideology all in itself. The medium is now the message, and the method, the madness. There is no overarching purpose, no so-called political cause behind the indiscriminate violence beat against civilians in the West, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, in Israel, or the cleansing of the Yazidis, the Christians, or the killing of their own jihadist mates of the past, as is the case with the feuding ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Africa and other parts of the world. In fact, what we are seeing today is a terrorism without a cause, a rebel averse to reconciliation, to negotiation, to any kind of parley, truce, or dialogue. Jihadism has become a self-professed doomsday movement which seeks to unleash a prophesied apocalypse, onto the world. This addictive bloodlust is so contagious, it might soon find its variants in other cultures and communities because it quotes the only certainty in a highly volatile time, which is death. Thus, the new millennium has given us a novel adversary who is not the conventional soldier of an enemy army, nor the usual subnational or anti-national insurgent, or any left-wing revolutionary fighting for a perceived socialist utopia. This violent non-state actor fights for non-humanist and apolitical cause. in fact, for an imagined afterlife. Now, there would be many people who would quite understandably disagree or not completely accept these observations. They might argue that jihadist groups do follow a political ideology, which they would term as political Islam or Islamism, the name given to a movement that believes that Islam is not just a religion, but a revolutionary socio-political movement for all times, and who claim it provides an alternative to the values of our liberal democratic world order. Again, some Islamist apologists might contend that the Taliban, the Muslim Brotherhood, Houthis, Iranian regime, etc., are not irrational violent actors, but perfectly rational players with quite tenable and discernible political and even nationalistic goals. Then again, there are experts like Marty Kaplan and Robert Zaretsky who point out that it is wrong to call modern jihadists as some kind of global anarchist or nihilist death cult. These scholars strongly disagree with former President Obama when he characterized ISIS as a death cult, and they disagree with former Secretary of State, US Secretary of State John Kerry, who called modern jihadist surge an ugly, savage, inexplicable, nihilistic, and valueless movement. According to them, it is wrong to equate modern jihadists with nihilists because the term is associated with the school of existentialist thinkers like the philosophers Sartre and Camus, who merely bewail the supposedly purposeless human condition. They contend the ISIS and Al-Qaeda fighters actually believe in a grand religious purpose behind their existence and proactively pursue that aim. In spite of these, the fact it is that Islamism has failed as a political system umpteen times, which most Islamists around the world find it too embarrassing to concede. None of the several experiments with Islamist policy, be it the Saudi, the Turkish, the Iranian, Talibani, or the ISIS models, have proven to be anything but utter disasters, even by standards and measures touted by Islamists themselves. The fact is that there is hardly any Islamist model in the world today that inspires any confidence amongst the Muslims. Still, surprisingly, we do not find any abatement in the extent of radicalization because Islamism has now turned itself to jihadism, as death and a glorified afterlife has become a convenient cop-out for a failed political ideology. But it is not just the radical non-state actors, but even revisionist states like Iran and Turkey, which cannot stand and deliver in terms of governance. And so they end up using their jihadist rhetoric to perpetuate war and mayhem in their neighborhoods. And into this banditry are hurled some deeply damaged, identity-impaired, third-generation migrant Muslim youth of the West, as well as members of other Islamist malcontents from the Middle East and Asia. Islam is simply, like other faiths, a religion and not a socio-political system, and concerns itself solely with the spiritual, metaphysical, and ethical domains. In spite of claims by Maududi and Sayyid Qutb, Islam does not ask its followers to be political, nor does it recommend or endorse any political system. It does not provide any overarching political philosophy or system of governance, be it monarchy, tribal egalitarianism, feudal despotism, democratic capitalism, or any industrial classless commune. Then again, the Sharia is not a single canon. There are several schools of fiqh and various sects and movements with divergent interpretations on jihad and politics in Islam. But the phenomenon of radicalization is not limited to the Muslim world. It is also increasing in the industrially advanced countries where liberal democracy is facing a decline. Some of the most celebrated political scientists and IR experts, including those like Francis Fukuyama, who once told us that liberal democracy was the end of history, are now claiming that we may already be in a post-liberal world order where identity politics and new tribalism are on the ascendant. In fact, the intellectual consensus on this is quite astonishing, despite the coming back of the Democratic Party president in America. Faith in global institutions like the United Nations has hit an all-time low, and even the World Health Organization has drawn a lot of flack and lost much goodwill during the ongoing COVID crisis. The World Trade Organization still seems incapable of mitigating US-Chinese trade wars, while faith in global liberal institutions is in serious decline. Meanwhile, rise of state capitalism run by totalitarian regimes in Asia and Middle East, which are devoid of liberalism and democracy, are projected as successful models for governance. Strongman leadership like that of Xi Jinping, Putin, Erdogan, and MPASD is seen as visionary in paving the way to economic development. The Washington consensus seems to be out of whack. We are already living in a radical illiberal age. The question is, why is liberalism on the decline? During my recent studies on the death wish in modern times, I was fascinated by the work of French sociologist Émile Durkheim, who wrote Le Suicide in 1897, in which he observed several factors that lay behind the unhappiness of people in modern societies and their reversion to religion and pre-modern ways of living. According to him, the breakdown of social structures and families in a highly competitive capitalist environment and rise of individualism creates a sense of insecurity in populations, particularly among the youth. The failure to achieve professional success and financial prosperity weighs heavily upon the minds of the masses, as it is often falsely assumed that the capitalist system makes it easy for anybody to be economically successful. Durkheim contends that religious groups have always established strong community ties of thought and action, virtually eliminated individual divergences, and thus achieved a high degree of unity, solidarity, and integrity than the individualistic capitalist societies of the modern age. Perhaps our modern hectic lifestyle needs to be less individualistic and give more importance to social familial ties. The degree of similarity between Durkheim's views and those of our contemporary social scientists, even a century later, is remarkable. Renowned sociologist Anthony Giddens argues that globalization has caused significant levels of insecurity for people and that fundamentalist religious views provide very simple answers to people subjected to a lot of confusion and uncertainty. Fundamentalism is thus seen as providing an antidote to intellectual complexity and moral relativism engendered by pluralistic societies and modern eclectic sensibilities. The problem is, how do we fight this postmodern malaise? And how do we stop the bigotry of religious purpose that violently infests the minds of the youth? Here I would like to warn that the radical literature of our times, which has been generated over more than a century now, appeals more at the subliminal level and panders to the Jungian domain of the dark side, which conservative societies feign to accept and are ill-equipped to fully embrace. Therefore, any counter-radical measure or messaging should not just operate at a level of rationality or objectivity, but also at the subliminal level, bringing peace and enlightenment to the disparaged souls. Again, a lot of patience is necessary before we start seeing the results of counter-radicalization programs. And so we should not just dismiss them outright, because most of them operate in the virtual space-time of the human consciousness. In terms of concrete measures, we first need to conduct systematic and robust polling to find out levels of radicalization across all communities in our countries. We need to find theologians, imams, and significant religious voices who have effectively made the counter-radical case. We would also have to train them in strategic communication skills and provide for them the most suitable medium for delivering their message. A little bit of expertise in psychological counseling would also enhance the abilities of counter-narrative experts in putting their messages across. Counter-narratives should not just have religious messaging, but political, socio-economic, historical, and at times even philosophical and scientific content. We will have to promote counseling for parents, especially those belonging to religiously conservative households who cannot manage their grown-up, unemployed, stay-at-home children that end up falling into wrong company and dangerous ideological influences. In these cultures, parents used to marry off their kids quite early, and so they have no knowledge and are not adept at handling the lonesome, rebellious youth at home. Our social media companies and outlets would have to certainly become far less permissive in circulating messages by radical groups. And internet search engines would have to help us in not just blocking radical websites, but in promoting counter-narrative messages whenever a user searches for religious incendiary content. In the end, we need to engage our young and brightest in the ideology of peace and would have to keep them away from the ideologies that celebrate death and destruction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, Marian Duris. Marian, are you here?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Can I
Thank you
see
very
you?
much.
Right, so Marian Duris is a foreign policy expert with experience in the international relations and security sphere in the United Kingdom and advisor member of the European Parliament. He monitors the current affairs to predict trends, legislating process of EU, initiatives of European Commission and background activities that affect the sovereignty of countries. Good morning, Marian.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for a nice introduction. Okay, so thank you all that I can be in your presence and listen these interesting views on interesting topics. My contribution will be on examining phenomena such as radicalization and terrorism.
Marian,
but
can I request you to switch on your video? I mean, we can't see your video, if that's okay.
I'm sorry, I had some connection issues, so that's why no I goes just through sound. Okay.
Yeah, you can continue.
Okay, great. Okay, so but from a European perspective, in sense of current situation, legislative, theoretical procedures, practice, weaknesses, strengths, challenges, and opportunities. Okay, so to combat the phenomenon of modern-day terrorism and radicalism, it is necessary to understand its origin, forms, transformations, and strategies that have been developed to counter it, and identify the mistakes that have been made along the way. The reasoning here is that the better grasp we have of the problem, the more sophisticated the tools we have to combat it can be. The recourse to terror, together with attempts to politically justify it before any terrorized society, gives a specific character to terrorist violence that distinguishes it from other forms. It means that terrorists consider that human being only as a means to achieve allegedly higher ends. Therefore, they produce a high level of suffering, affecting the most vulnerable and unprotected areas of society. The process of globalization in all scales of human action, accompanied with free movement of goods, persons, information, and capital, represents a favorable environment for extremists to promote their ideas, attract new supporters, and broaden the conflict area. The factors that may affect this phenomenon and tendencies are multiple and diverse: economic, social, educational, institutional, state-of-art information and communications technologies, activities of religious and other authorities, interfaith, interethnic, or other tensions, the degree of feeling rejection, frustration, isolation, self-victimization, and the failure to find socially acceptable mechanism to solve the created contradictions and conflicts. Be radical means to be criminal as per state of mind. Radicalization has its own psychological and social aspects. As mentioned previously, not well-educated, frustrated individual with connections to dangerous ideology or sectarian thinking becomes an easy target to affiliate dangerous organizations, affecting mainly the fighting regions. Proper national and sovereign policy in this field should be based on condemnation of all acts of terrorism, regardless of circumstances, forces that committed them, location, time, and method of execution. Prevention and struggle against terrorism are important aspects of the achievement of foreign policy priorities in its endeavors to ensure long-lasting global and regional stability to curb the security threats posed by terrorism and other terrorism. related threats. Also, the global and other circumstances have led to manifold changes in the nature of the threat in several key aspects. Earlier security threats of regional character, as internal conflicts, absence of governance, unemployment, poverty, a low level of social protection, have become more extensive due to the interdependence of recent societies and are supportive to the strengthening of radicalism and violent extremism. The existence of terrorist structures in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, which managed, sometimes with external help, to incite and recruit thousands of fighters and an incomparably higher number of supporters from almost all countries of the world, developing an enormous economic and other potential for supporting activities. The rise and accessibility of modern technologies have increased the risk of their misuse, not only for communication, propaganda, recruitment, and training purposes. The trend of decentralization of action is reflected in the opportunity for perpetrators to be self-radicalized individuals who independently decide to execute an attack. Financial flows which may be used to finance terrorism, including money laundering and connecting structures with crime and perpetration of criminal offenses in the field of organized crime in the function of terrorism financing, are difficult to control. Mass migration of unknown background and past, support of this migration type by certain activists and NGOs, and weak borders may be used for unimpeded movement of terrorists and be conducive to the development of extremism both in transit and final destination. Also, terrorists generally choose targets that are important social symbols. Over the past time, there have been increasingly more frequent attacks at all easily available targets, executed by means at hand, while resulting in as many victims as possible, material destruction and fear. Proliferation and illegal trade in all types of weapons increase the danger that weapons come into the possession of structures which the government cannot control, particularly terrorist associations and individuals. The European Union aims to be an area of freedom, security and justice without internal frontiers. According to the statements in the documents, Europeans should feel confident that wherever they move within the EU, their freedom and security are well protected. Combating cross-border crime and terrorism is reported as a common European responsibility. EU countries have the frontline responsibility for security, yet EU cooperation is suitable to fight terrorism. While respecting national responsibilities for upholding the law and safeguarding internal security, all relevant EU and national actors work together to tackle terrorist threats emanating from homegrown or foreign terrorists acting alone or in a group and realized by terrorist means. In December 2020, the European Commission adopted a new counterterrorism agenda for the EU, setting out a way forward for actions at EU level, looking to better anticipate, prevent, protect, and respond to threats. The counterterrorism agenda should be one of the deliverables of the way forward on internal security, a core component of the Security Union strategy adopted by the Commission in July 2020, which should anticipate and respond to evolving threats by identifying vulnerabilities, building capacity where most needed, tackling radicalization, increasing security, denying terrorists the means to act and allowing prosecution, reinforcing external borders, minimizing impact, and increasing support to victims. Security Union strategy has been adopted for the period 2020 to 2025. From combating terrorism and organized crime to preventing and detecting hybrid threats and increasing the resilience of critical infrastructure to promoting cybersecurity and fostering research and innovation, the strategy lays out tools and measures to be developed over the next years to ensure security in the physical and digital environment. When we look more into the past, in March 2017, the European Union adopted the Directive on Combating Terrorism, which reinforces the legal framework to more comprehensively cover conducts related to terrorism. According to this directive, all EU countries have to ensure that they criminalize conduct such as training and traveling for terrorism, as well as terrorist financing. These harmonized definitions of offenses serve as a benchmark for cooperation and information exchange between national authorities. Following the 2015 Charlie Hebdo attack, the Commission proposed in its European Agenda on Security to establish a European Counterterrorism Center to improve the exchange of information and operational support to member states investigators. Within Europol, the EU Agency for Law Enforcement Cooperation, the center pools specialized resources, expertise, and information on foreign terrorist fighters, explosive firearms, financial intelligence, and online propaganda to support member states' law enforcement counterterrorism units. And before, in 2005, EU counterterrorism strategy committed the bloc to combating terrorism globally while respecting human rights. On the other side, when we follow the effectivity and credibility of all these painstakingly and pompously articulated intentions, 76% of citizens believe corruption is widespread across the European Union. While we live in a highly volatile world, one must carefully guard human freedoms and real and notable security. However, sometimes exaggerated and rather ideological than pragmatic approach of representatives makes every effort to piggyback onto every crisis slowly endangering both. Unfortunately, it is the same bloc which increases tension in society by tight lockdowns, seeks to limit the legal possession of guns for personal protection, and at the same time naively keeps the Schengen zone open during the earth-shaking mass migration. The number of illegal migrants who have entered Europe is significantly increasing even now. According to the EU agency Frontex, there were more than 160,000 illegal border crossings in the first 10 months of this year, which is an increase of 70% in comparison with last year. For example, such a policy allowed Salah Abdeslam to escape through 6 borders after the 2015 Paris attacks. It can appear the European Union is trying to use ineffective gestures to appease an uneasy public without addressing the elephant in the room. When we mention the surveillance as alleged tool of the security, it is a real boogeyman for most of the Europeans, mainly after mass surveillance projects scandals. Even Giovanni Buttarelli, the European Data Protection Supervisor, has said the rulings in this area are neither proportionate or necessary. The indiscriminate and blanket targeting of people's data is not only an infringement on individual liberties, but it also does nothing to address these issues induced by same entity as wants to solve it. Sometimes it reminds the words of one of Islamic State brides from the United Kingdom, who after return said in the interview for Good Morning Britain, quote, "You are clearly struggling with extremism and terrorism, you clearly don't know what you are doing," unquote. For example, after the fall of Afghan Kabul, last summer, the French authorities discovered by regular screening procedures that among the evacuated people were 7 men with strong affiliation to violent terrorist movements. Suddenly, when all of them were waiting in prison to get repatriated back to Afghanistan, few French political activists of the Green Party raised their indexes to protest. Quote, "It's better to have them in France under the surveillance than in Afghanistan doing harm to other people," unquote, they said. It looks that is not an approach which identifies the risks. Experts can call it very benevolent, and we have already seen the consequences of this type of behavior in the past concerning mass immigration in late 70s France. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the world's leading security organization, has warned the specter of terrorism will continue to haunt Europe for many years to come against the increase in radicalization in European nations. While the report cites the many attacks and incidents in OSCE countries, it comes as Europe has experienced years of terror attacks including the Manchester Arena bombing, Victoria stabbing, and attacks on London Bridge, Nice, Central Vienna, Barcelona, Carcassonne, and Berlin. Moreover, what international organizations are not showing us is that all the terrorist attacks in recent years were committed by second, third, or even fourth generation of foreign migrants. They are simply defined as European citizens today, without mentioning their roots. A responsible structure that really cares about the well-being and security of its citizens cannot open the door to the millions of people it knows little about, and then wonder and grieve that such events are happening. In recent decades, society has been the victim of one of the worst scourges. Terrorism. Sorry? Can I continue?
Please continue.
Okay, it will just move. An expressive act of violence that has appeared throughout history with various forms of expression and cruelty. Firstly, sovereign nations of Europe should have to act sovereignly, and in the second row to communicate and cooperate with international organizations in the efforts to find the truth about roots of radicalism and to eliminate terrorism with multidisciplinary strategies and comprehensive approaches embedding all instruments of power. With creation of awareness trainings and contribution of civil vigilance, it is appropriate to professionally recognize risks, recognize the failures of integration of non-integrable individuals, apply strategies in local and in general level, and think about all domains of life and stable state structures which can help in the fight against this unpleasant phenomenon of these days. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marian. Our next speaker is Ayman Abdid Salma. He's a professor of international law at Nizam Ayer Military Academy. He is also external expert for the ICRC in Geneva to comment on the Third Geneva Convention for the protection of POW. Before this, he was lieutenant officer and English translator for the Egyptian peacekeeping forces in Bosnia in 1997 until 1998. He has published 3 books: Status of EU Peacekeeping Force, International Liability of Counting Genocide, and Post-Conflict Justice Mechanism in Arab World since 1945. He has several achievements, including the NATO Medal of International Peacekeeping in 1998 and the Italian Medal of International Peacekeeping in 2000. Good morning. Sir?
Akshay, Professor Salama has joined or not?
Sir, I don't think he is here in the meeting. I think we need to move forward.
No worries. We can start with the question answer. Lauren, you can start with the Q&A session.
Great. So there is one question that I saw in the chat for Dr. Adil Rasheed. Someone said that it was informative. However, my question is, when we speak on countermeasures, social conditions of the individual seem to overshadow and overpower the measures of counter-radicalization. How will you maintain social accounting of these individual societies? What your views and on the same?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, it is a very genuine concern that the social conditioning and also the atmosphere, if it is quite radicalized in a way that it's a polarized society to an extent, it becomes difficult for people to remain non-partisan and to be neutral. But that there are various kinds of things which governments can do in order to counter the atmosphere of radicalization, we need to understand that there are different sets of measures in countering radicalization, as these are counter-radicalization measures and de-radicalization measures. Counter-radicalization measures are taken at a larger scale, addressing the entire society. De-radicalization measures are taken targeted at particular individuals who have been radicalized, and you are trying to de-radicalize them. Counter-radicalization measures are done at a much bigger level, at the social level. So you actually start public relations campaigns. You try to engage community leaders, thinkers, and try to disseminate their messages against radicalization. You try to end ghettoization in cities so that communities should live together. The more segregated they are in a city, one community is not living with the other, it creates problems. So city planning should be done in a way that communities come together. You can have huge events, sporting events. You could have intercultural events. Like in India, we have, these poetic symposiums, the Kavi Sammelans or Mushairas, where people of both communities come together and they enjoy such events and participate in cultural forums. So various things can be done to create a composite ethos, a social ethos, which rises above the small, community-driven differences, trying to overcome them. So there, this is not a real science. Counter-radicalization measures have just started. It is only for the last, say, 10 years, things have been done at such a massive scale around various countries. And it is a work in progress. And we are learning from our faults and from our shortcomings and from our mistakes. Unfortunately, there is so much of criticism, and probably the expectations are so high, so it is understandable, that we find that certain people who were de-radicalized end up becoming terrorists again. Certain counter-radicalization measures do not work. Counter-narrative programs are not as effective. But I think we are being very harsh here. We are just trying to make progress. We are trying to do something good. It is like a goalkeeper trying to save his goalpost. And if there are any misses, and if he's not able to save some goals, we are trying to blame the goalkeeper so much that we are thinking of removing him altogether. We need a goalkeeper. We need to have counter-radicalization measures. And a lot is being done in this regard, and a lot of good work. Prison reforms are being done so that the average criminal is not put aside with, has to put up with a radicalized prisoner. So he may not become himself radicalized. And there is a new global initiative when it comes to Islamic teachings in a way that they don't radicalize the Muslim population into becoming terrorists and violent extremists. And they have a better understanding and appreciation of other cultures, other religions, and they don't see truth only in their own religious ideology. So these things take time. We must understand that the radicals which we are seeing today, the rise of Islamism started way back in the Middle East in the early 20th century. And over a period of time, these people have generated a lot of extremist radical literature. So they already have that advantage. And we and now that the moderate literature and these this thing is coming up, it will take its time, and it is making an impression. So so we should wait on this, and social conditioning can bring about change, but the impact is not always as evident and as immediate as we would like it to be. I would say this much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, I learned a lot from these few minutes. Actually, I want to ask you something. Is that okay?
Right, please.
So you mentioned before Francis Fukuyama. Yes. I teach Francis Fukuyama for my student
right.
at Bar-Ilan University. So I would like if you say another few words about Francis Fukuyama and his theory, and that the end of the history, it's not happened because it's not realized the Islam radically. It's not, he didn't mention this ideologic, and it's very important, right?
Yeah, I mean, I will be answering a person who herself teaches Francis Fukuyama. So, I mean, how could I? I'm not as qualified as you are. You know the subject much better. But I would just like to say that it was at a very young age, and that Fukuyama came up with those ideas. He just wrote an article, and it just caught on. He himself was surprised, if I'm not wrong, to find that an article which he had written, he had to change it into a book because it became so popular. And it was just at the time that the Soviet Union got dismembered and the US came up as the sole global superpower. And that's why it became a very popular idea. Over a period of time, that sense of maturity did dawn upon him, that time and history moves on, and that the Hegelian dialectic of the thesis comes up with its own antithesis. And so this process goes on, and there's no end of history as such. And it is great on part of Fukuyama to now concede that he was not quite right, and to have actually contributed in a very big way in trying to understand the new forces, political forces, which are coming up the world over. And that's why he talks about a new tribalism which has come up. And some of his recent lectures are quite engaging and quite interesting, the intellectual that he is. So it also shows us that intellectuals also go through a process of revision, and so is the case with religious communities. There are these peaks and troughs. We are all humans, we make mistakes, and then we learn from those mistakes. So to brand any person or any community for an extended period of time as being the problem community is wrong. There are these process of introspection. Then there are times when certain communities feel that they have been wrong, so they become quite radical. So these processes keep happening. And so Francis Fukuyama certainly is quite an interesting intellectual. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Marian, do you want to say another thing, or maybe from the audience there is a questions?
Lauren, there is a question. Lauren, there is a question in the chat. You can look at.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this question from Marian. We saw the case of Shamina Begum in UK, where post-conflict revolution of terrorists become quite difficult because of the firm belief in radical thought and unwillingness to compare with them. So our state should respond to this. Should it be dealt with like Shamina case, or to shut them out, or there is more economizing approach? Marian, do you want to answer that? Do you want to, Adil, do you want to comment about that?
Okay, yes, I'll comment about it, but I hope that we will be joined by other speakers also. We are the Lone Ranger here. Anyway, so I would just like to say that in this case, Shamima Begum case in the UK, the lady tried to show that she has actually reformed herself. There were videos of her actually taking out her hijab, wearing Western clothes and all that, and she tried to convince the international community that she's actually moved on from ISIS ideology. It's a very difficult decision, and it is a very contentious one at that. And then apart from what the individual may or may not be doing it for, if there is sincerity or not in it, then it also becomes a big political issue. It becomes that if the government takes any decision, how will the population react to that decision? So these things are very difficult once a person has made a bad judgment early in life. and has taken an extreme decision of moving out of the country and of completely disavowing from the very place which has nourished it, which has given it education and a good life, and then to move against it and join an extremist terrorist organization, to then expect that and to have vowed that it would harm that state and the people there, that to expect that the person would be reclaimed is something. It is very unfortunate. It takes time for young people to actually understand the nuances of politics and life. And so we can only say that very young minds get radicalized and revolutionized by certain ideas without understanding the entirety and the complexity of politics. And so it becomes very difficult if you make a bad judgment early in life. And it also sometimes becomes difficult for certain countries and governments to make decisions when they are not entirely convinced that the person is no longer a threat to their security.
Okay, thank you. Once again, Marian, are you with us?
I have a question for Marian. Marian? Ayman, have you joined? I see a number which has recently joined. Dr. Ayman? Dr. Salama, have you joined? Marian, are you there?
Sir, I think Marian is not here right now.
Okay, no worries. Just then one more question for Professor Adil Rasheed Saab. Just one last question.
You're throwing curveballs at me. Anyway.
Just one last question. Okay. So what's your take on Turkey trying to, like, expand its radicalization tentacles in Europe and threatening every day that, I mean, if you don't let us have our way, bombs and, all these explosions will rock your streets?
I think it is something which we should study in depth about Turkey and the way Turkish politics has been changing over certainly over the last 20, 30 years. We have found that Turkey wanted to be part of the EU. It is a very important member of NATO. But once that thing did not happen, it started to think that it belongs to perhaps another region. The region which it had turned its back upon. And so it started to rediscover its Ottoman roots and try to spread its influence in the Middle East. And that has led to the greater Islamization within Turkey. And within the Turkish political spectrum, this view, the Ataturk ideology has been badly dented. Now, I personally believe that generally non-state actors are not always non-state actors. They are generally proxies of certain powers which are in the region. Once the US withdrew from Iraq and Syria, Iran and Turkey have become like revisionist states, whereas Iran is trying to spread its influence up to the Mediterranean. Turkey, after seeing that it is not making any influence in Europe, thought that it would also expand itself. And if you look at Turkey and Iran, surprisingly, right from the ancient times, you had the Roman Empire and the Anatolian Greek Macedonian Empire and the Persians. And then you had the Sassanid and the Byzantine Empire. And then you come to the Safavi and the Ottoman rivalry. So these two powers have always contended against each other. The very reason that Iran became Shia in the 16th century, although it was Sunni before that, shows and because of the animosity towards the Ottoman Empire, this rivalry came about. So the same thing is in a way playing out. a kind of a revisionism of trying to spread one's tentacles and try to become the, because there is a feeling that there is a huge constituency and a big vacuum, political vacuum in Iraq and Syria, that Turkey thinks that it could now become the leader of the Islamic world now that there is no other major power around. So it is trying to throw its weight about. It is also, it had its ways in trying to deal with terrorist organizations in Iraq and Syria, which was not very, which was quite dubious to say the least. And so, so we find that in a way, Turkey is also threatening Europe that if I could regulate the migration, I could in fact I'm a very important agent in regulating security. So Turkey is a very interesting case in study, and I would leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rasheed. Just one last question after that, we won't bother you. So we talked a lot about radicalization and counter-radicalization and the counter-narrative. So my question is in particular about the de-radicalization programs. Like, in Saudi, we have seen that they launched massive de-radicalization programs, but the people who came out, they once again got radicalized. In Kashmir also, I have seen most of the de-radicalization programs, and especially those launched by the governments, failing miserably. So what's your take on that? Can a person be de-radicalized?
You see, we should understand what is the trigger. Why do people get radicalized? If there are certain people generally don't get radicalized as much by religious reasons as political reasons, or by a particular religious movement which is political. There are certain issues when it comes to Saudi Arabia and the way there is one family which is ruling the Holy Land. And Saudi Arabia has always had a very love-hate relationship with Wahhabism. It was created by Wahhabism to begin with. However, over a period of time, it found out that it has created a monster which it could not fully control. And so once the Iranian Revolution happened, it started exporting Wahhabism outside the country in order to keep those people out of the country. So there has always been this great love-hate which has been going on in Saudi Arabia. And so it is actually a major political movement. Most of the terrorist organizations, so there is a problem with Wahhabism. Although Abdul Wahhab accepted kingship, Wahhabis generally do not like the idea of kingship. They consider it to be un-Islamic. The Prophet did not act like a king. He slept on the ground and he had a hut, and that's all. So the idea that in their version of Islamism, Saudi state is too totalitarian and it is not actually following the Sharia. It is also an ally of the West. So all these reasons are something which are very fundamental to the reason why these people react the way they are reacting. So if the political narratives are not very strong, the government does not present its case in a strong manner in trying to convince why its foreign policies or domestic policies are what they are, people will continue falling out of it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Rasheed, for your answer. I'm just narrating one small incident. So I saw one case of de-radicalization, a successful case, but that was another shocker. There was one fellow, a friend of mine, ex-Lashkar militant. So he was jailed in Jammu, and then he was totally de-radicalized. He was indoctrinated in Jamaat-e-Islami madrasas and schools, and later he joined Lashkar. But after that, he was arrested, spent a year in Jammu jail. There he came in touch with the communist, and then he was de-radicalizing, but then later he got radicalized as a communist, as a Marxist.
Yeah,
that was quite a shock.
So there would be certain political grievances. He switched sides, but he would have an anti-establishment streak in him. So he just moved from one extremist ideology to the other. So we must not, yeah. So it is quite understandable. But if we have counter-radicalization programs and we have a few cases of recidivism, a few people could not be saved or they reverted to their old ways, I would say still, if we are able to de-radicalize a few, that itself is an achievement. And it is only through failures that we will learn where we went wrong, because this is a completely new exercise. So we should not completely debunk de-radicalization or counter-radicalization programs just because it is a work in progress. And it's only through the shortcomings and failures that we will try to find out, okay, this case happened. So where did we go wrong and what we should address? I think your next speaker, who has been in the Sri Lankan psychologist, who has actually reclaimed many terrorists, she would be in a much better position to answer these questions on de-radicalization.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Lauren. Thank you so much for giving me this liberty to just going on endlessly with my questions.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be in part of this conference. Thank you so much.